I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Press circle to cat. Lol. Meme game. Look, I'm a cat. I can run around, jump on things, knock things off ledges. Because cat. Yeah, cat game. So cool. Clearly, there's nothing more to it. Everyone loves cats, after all. The internet is made of cats and all that. You know how it is. Get some high quality assets, make the cat look cool when it moves, and bam! Best game ever made. This will win all the awards because people will vote for it just because. Say it with me now. Press circle to cat. I'm sure you've heard all this before. Most certainly in the lead up to release, and for a little while afterwards too. There were memes out the yazoo. My favourite is the one comparing it to The Last of Us Part 2. It's so bad. I love it. No, I'm not using that clip. The point is, it's easy to look at a game like Stray and just dismiss it as being a game made exclusively for the YouTube reaction hype train. An entirely forgivable response, because it did get a fair bit of that too. But this is an epic scale to Mix-a-Lot indeed. Even before the hype train had started, people were already beginning to catch on that there was going to be more beneath the surface. And sure, maybe the press circle to cat aspect was, at least in part, inspired by the desire to catch the public consciousness and do a little signal boosting. And who can blame them, really? There's a lot of competition and shonk. Video games are expensive and time-consuming to make. But then Stray actually released, and people very quickly caught on, even the more colourful types, that there was, lol, meme game, but why am I starting to feel things? What's going on here?
Whoa.
I'm not gonna lie. Why would I? I got the game because I like cats. Even if there hadn't been anything else going on, I'd probably have picked it up anyway. Seeing the details coming out was what really clinched it as a day one purchase though. A pre-order, in fact. I was sat at my computer waiting for it to unlock and finishing installing in real time, as they say. And I was legitimately hooked the moment it started. Hell, just seeing the promotional materials was enough to tell me this was something I could not pass up. I'm a bit of a sucker for a good cyberpunk noir, you know? I first saw Blade Runner when I was only 8 years old, maybe younger, and even at that age, it just spoke to me in a way that no other film had. Since then, I've seen how massively overrated it's become, being one of those films that people start getting into when their tastes start expanding out from more mainstream media. And with good reason. It's a great film, even in its more questionable theatrical cuts and the like. But it's also a Fight Club kind of film. It's an entry point, it's entry level, not the final destination. You know what I mean? Not to denigrate the film in any way, it is genuinely superb, but people hold it up as being the pinnacle of perfection in all ways. Positively perfect in every way, rather than as the more thought-provoking, inspirational piece of art it really should be. Inspirational in the sense it should be inspiring you to start stepping further into the woods, off the beaten path, and trying to find even more wonderful sights still to be found. Heading deep and finding a mystical land of expression that most can't even begin to suspect could exist. Never mind, does exist. And oh my word, do I sound like a pretentious little dipshit right about now. So,
Moving on.
my path to actually finishing Stray has been interesting, and a tad on the turbulent side. See, my little girl, both of my kids actually, love cats. Just like pretty much everyone else, to be honest. So I knew when it came time to start playing, she had to be there with me, which she was. And, well, this video, it's for you. Hey Zamzams, told you I'd make this. The problem started immediately. Within literal seconds of starting, she was demanding the controller from me. It's cats. She loves cats, so she had to play it. Which was not at all unexpected, of course. It was just precisely how insistent she became. We did have something similar with the Jurassic World Evolution games, because, again, who doesn't love dinosaurs? But this was on a whole other level. So ever-present, it got to the point where the idea of playing the game, for myself, Stray, became extremely anxiety-inducing. Because it's really hard to enjoy something when you have someone breathing down your neck the entire time, literally. And of course, I felt guilty for reacting so strongly because she's a kid. Well, maybe that's not, of course, I don't know. It seems obvious to me. She just wants to press circle to meow. Okay, enough of that meme. That's the last time. Probably. In the end, by which I mean the same day, launch day, I just sodded it off and bought a second copy for the PlayStation 4 so she could just play as much as she wanted. But by then it had already gotten a bit too full on for me to get back into it. I put in a few hours making it to the first hub area and completing most of the tasks required to start heading for the second area. But I haven't been back since, or hadn't at least. And that's where it sat to this very day, at time of writing. It's changed since then. Which has been a deliberate decision on my part, because I want to lay out my premise first, then go finish the rest of the game to see how well it holds up. I've finished it multiple times now, but let's see what I had to say. In short, is Stray a robot? From the very beginning, I had some strong suspicions. I have some strong suspicions he is. Though I knew enough about the game to know it never overtly states either way, even before I played it, with the majority of the apparent narrative being about the androids forming a new society after whatever happened to the humans that originally created them, the androids being the NPCs. They will henceforth be known as Andys. That's what my kid calls them. The good old what is life, what does it mean to be alive chestnut. I know I'm not alone in positing this question. It seems quite a common one from what I can tell, the whole thing about him being a robot. But I have not engaged with any of the content around the query, so any and all musings put forward will come squarely from my own noggin. That's still true to this day, actually. That's not just something that was true then. I still haven't really looked into it. I've watched other videos about it, but none of them about him being a robot. Not that it really matters, I just wanted to throw that out there. Given that I've already made it clear my impressions are based on an incomplete relationship with the game, you might think that I have very little to work with, and you would absolutely be incorrect in believing this. The game's very systems offer a cornucopia of potential support entirely divorced from any narrative development which may, or may not, occur further down the line. Spoilers. They do. I have a lot more to say. The quickest and easiest thing I can point to is pretty much everything, actually. The mere idea that a cat, an actual biological little mogmog, could do most of the very specific things Stray does along the way is probably a conceit of making the story work. Let's be honest. After all, it would be immensely difficult to push everything forward if the cat was literally just a regular old Mowgli. Catting around, doing cat things, meow meow, press circle and all that. They're canny little creatures, but they aren't exactly known for their ability to solve complex strings of lateral thinking. Making their way through a maze or some such, sure. But that is most decidedly not the same thing as finding a series of electronic devices, connecting them to the correct I/O ports, and activating precise operational procedures on high-level technical devices. Like, I've had my own cats repeatedly turn on or off my computer by jumping on the button, but I've yet to see them do it deliberately. Then walk precisely across the keyboard to boot up Windows and navigate their way to YouTube to watch a Maru video. You know what I mean? I've even had them turn on my Steam Link and actually get it to start streaming my PC to the TV in the living room. It happened once. It was rather amusing, but it was entirely accidental. They just jumped on the controller and jumped on a button. Anyway, the whole thing. It's an extremely difficult ludonarrative dissonance to reconcile if Stray is truly intended to be nothing more than a typical feeless Meowth. Though I'm happy to accept it, suspension of disbelief and all that, the game needs to work. If you just go with it. I simply believe that, in this instance, that's a leap of faith one is not required to make. Because there most certainly are ways, not all too difficult, that you could work around these limitations to still keep things mostly real-world logic-based. A few allowances for the sake of gameplay loop is one thing. A persistent, all-encompassing, implicit rejection of what we all know to be how the world works, that takes things to a whole different level of incredulity.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Simultaneously, the most difficult and simplest conceit to work past is B12, the little robot companion, the little drone dude. It's easy enough to see how his commentary on the world is directed more at the player than Stray himself, or herself, or itself. No, I'm not afraid of misgendering, I just don't know. In isolation, just one of those little things we accept as being more symbolic than him literally popping out to have a quick chat about points of interest. When we start factoring in, I'm just going to stay with his for Stray, when we start factoring in his interactions with the various Andys met along the way, it seems quite clear we are supposed to take these things at face value. A series of interactions that do actually take place. That the Andys are actually talking to Stray, and Stray is responding on a cognitive level. And though we could offer the allowance that Stray simply wanders off, or is somehow compelled to remain in place long enough for these conversations to take place, we are giving nothing, explicit or otherwise, in-game to support anything of that kind. Also, a quick aside. Henceforth, I shall be referring to the game's NPCs as Andys. I already said that. I really should read these ahead before I start recording them, because it's been a while since I wrote this. Anyway, as this is a script written for my little girl, as I already said. Well, she's spent a lot of hours in-game, even more since I wrote this. We streamed the entire thing, where she played all but 2 sections of it. When I was first telling her what they were called, she either misheard or simply didn't care, and she started to say Andy, and it just kind of stuck. I already explained this, but whatever. My older girl used to say Omwin to me an alien. It's just one of those things you do as a parent. Anywho, speaking of the Andys, they offer one of the strongest evidences thus far. When you first reach the underground village, one of them stops you and directly addresses Stray, not B12, commenting on how he looks so much like one of the Zurks. Zurks being those orange potato-looking things you should have seen already in the footage. But I'll pop some extra footage up on screen as well, if I need to, if I remember. They're some kind of garbage disposal units, semi-intelligent. They actively hunt down moving things and break them down into their base components. And the Andys are full-on terrified of them, which is extremely intriguing. Both what they are and do, and the fact that Stray could be mistaken for one, on a very, very loosely broad level, at a distance, out of the corner of your eye, maybe. But at anything more than a cursory glance, well, he has 2 eyes and a tail, for a start. To me, the Zurks, they look more like Mahusive tardigrades. Even the briefest of looks should be enough to see that they are extremely different beasts. So we have to wonder, giving benefit of doubt, in-universe, let's just accept that the Andys have never seen anything like a cat before. Other than each other, the only thing they have ever seen is a Zurk, the only other living creature they have any experience with. One could assume that they were erring on the side of caution, perhaps even suspecting that Stray could be some new, evolved version of them, the Zergs. Intense fear isn't exactly known for activating the most rational of responses, and the Andes, it's made very clear, are attempting to be as human-like as possible. They are acting as though they are human. However, we do know that they have at least some concept of what the world was like before the passing of humanity. I half remember one of them talking about birds. I'm going to have to put a pin in that and come back to it later, though. And I still don't remember now. I obviously did when I wrote this, but not anymore. Anyway, we do get some indications of them having learned about prior life. And, well, cats, you know. If there is any type of animal, even if only at a biological morphology level, that would survive in old world literature, we have depictions of cats dating back to some of the earliest societies. The Egyptians, of course, flat out worshipped them. And this isn't some obscure esoteric knowledge that turns up in those things you didn't know kind of lists. Or maybe it does. Because lists like that are always full of well-known tidbits anyway. But that's enough, shade thrown. I've already seen that a strong element of the narrative is about rediscovering details about the old world, the society that came before. It's unclear precisely how far back, or if this is even the Earth that we know. It could be some alien planet for all we know, but the fact remains that cats are, and likely were, a part of the ecosystem. The Andes, albeit to wildly different degrees, know something about the past. So they should know that cats existed. And hell, perhaps that's why they ultimately take a moment to give Stray a chance. My point remains, he looks absolutely bugger all like a Zerk, and we have nothing to suggest they even consider he could be some rare variant they haven't encountered before.
Oh.
This actually opens up a whole other can of worms, though. Do the Zerks actually look the same as we see them through the eyes of Stray? Yes, this is just as much of a stretch, but who knows? Is it possible we see them in an exaggerated manner because he sees them as a threat? And, being a cat, or is he would know that they are not other cats. The way they move, the sounds they make, the way they smell, he absolutely recognizes them as a threat. That's reinforced through gameplay as well. You have to run away from them, and goes out of his way to avoid them as much as he possibly can. So it's a possibility. Maybe. I don't know. Extrapolating further, laterally, out from this idea, what if Stray actually is a Zerk? That ties in a lot more neatly with my hypothesis of him being robotic. Robotic? Whatever. I'll go with robotic. Perhaps he really is a new version of them, just as the Andes have evolved a new sense of purpose. Perhaps over the centuries, the Zerks have adapted and grown out of their initial purpose. They clearly have some kind of biological element to them, cybernetic more than full-blown robots, and we know enough to be quite certain that they have the ability to replicate, which is how I can weirdly segue into one of my most favourite of all subjects. This is the bit some people have been waiting for. The so-called Fermi paradox. Yes, we are seriously going there. Just allow me a moment to explain, because it will all make sense in but a moment. For those who don't know, the Fermi paradox derives from mathematical calculations done by a physicist by the name of Enrico Fermi. He was in an informal chat with some other physicists who were musing about the apparent lack of intelligent alien life in the universe. Something which wasn't considered to be all that surprising until he did some rough sums in his... right there, in his bloody head. Literally, did some sums in his head. He was known for doing high-level equational mathematics just on the spur of the moment. And he worked out that even under the propulsion technology we had at the time, it was the 60s, I believe, maybe 70s, it was easily possible for a single species to have spread out enough, even if only probes, to be present in every section of the galaxy in only a few 100,000 years. So the story goes, someone asked, where are they? in jest. Then he stopped and was like, yeah, actually, where are they? Well, first I have to get this out of the way because it's something that bugs me. It's not a fucking paradox. Semantics is something that I can easily fall into. Is it obvious? But a paradox is when you have two things that contradict each other, with both seeming to be completely accurate. Think Schrodinger's cat. That's an actual paradox based on the maths behind quantum superposition, a part of quantum physics. Again, very simply, and I don't understand why because I'm not a physicist. But anyway, it says that if you have a cat in a box with something else that can kill it at an indeterminate time, somewhere in the maths, the cat will die but will still be alive, literally in both states at the same time. See, that's a paradox. It contradicts itself because you can't be alive and dead. Fermi's paradox is just something that seems weird. We know it is possible for onwinds or us to spread across the entire galaxy in relatively short timescales compared to the universe, but we don't see onwinds anywhere, at least not conclusively. So it leaves us in a position where we're wondering why. That's not the same thing. That's a curiosity, not a paradox. A commonly posited solution is that of the von Neumann probe. This is where it starts to bear on what we're talking about. A small, self-replicating robot that will fly out to another system, do a bit of mining, and build a copy of itself, if not more. 2 copies, 10 copies, whatever. Hence the self-replicating part, which sounds like a sensible idea on the surface. You send this thing out, you only need to send a few of them, they travel, takes however long it takes, but they do it, they get there, make copies themselves, those ones go out somewhere else, and eventually they'll just spread. It's time consuming, sure, since they'll be moving at conventional speeds, like 4% the speed of light or whatever it is. It'll take them something like 100 years to get to Alpha Centauri, which is 4 light years away. But, you know, even our fastest probes thus far still take more than a decade to leave the solar system, never mind make it to another one. Although we do have the potential to build a type of probe that could reach Proxima Centauri, the closest star, in as little as 20 years, believe it or not. Kind of. The problem being, it wouldn't be able to slow down and stop there. If it did, it would take a lot longer, because when you accelerate through space, you have to spend as much time decelerating to stop. So you have to get halfway there and then slow down, assuming you accelerate the whole way. You still have to slow down a lot, but whatever. But still, the idea is that you build, say, 100 of these devices, send them out in different directions and program them so that each one makes more stuff that I've already said. Let's say 5 new probes and sends them on. Rinse and repeat. Exact time frames vary, but we could expect the entire galaxy to have at least a single probe per system within a couple 100,000 years. Let's say 1 million. Drop in the bucket. The Earth is like 4.5 billion years old. Drop in the bucket compared to almost 14 billion years of the universe. But it's also a longer span of time than the human species has existed. Even in its most fundamental state, if we carry in things like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, which I am absolutely freaking obsessed with at the moment, we have no idea if humans will even exist in another 2,000 centuries. We have no idea if we'll exist in another century with the way things are going, let alone if they still care to check the data. Space is really big, you know.
Well, sorry. We thought you were dead.
I was. I'm better now.
However, we run into an extremely worrying potential with this method. We like to think that once something is programmed, once the software is written and implemented, we're all good to go. Computer code is static and just fucking low. Anyone who has ever actually used a computer? Yeah, just no. There's that infamous Super Mario 64 skip that literally happened because a random bit of cosmic radiation hit a console. It hit it in just a way and at just the right time that it flipped a single variable from 0 to 1 or vice versa, and that changed what was happening in that moment. But that was just a single, very specific variable that was transient. Just imagine that when you have something zipping through space with a whole slew of commands that are less situational. Just imagine it hits the specific gate telling the probe whether it should make a copy or wait, forcing to a permanent yes state. And because this is something which is also programmed to make an exact duplicate of itself, down to the most minute details, every time the new one makes a copy, an exact copy, each of them is then in a permanent replicate state. They will not stop making duplicates, and they all head off and make more probes that are compelled to do the same thing. It'd take a long ass time still, but they'd quite happily keep chugging along and turn literally everything into more probes, including eventually each other. When there is no other material available, they will start cannibalizing themselves. So yeah, not such a great idea. It probably won't ever happen like that if the coding is adaptable and sophisticated enough and, autocorrect or whatever. But the mere possibility should be, and apparently is, enough to discourage any species smart enough to make them from actually making them. We absolutely must not, just in case. So let's look at the Zergs. I hope, you can see where I'm going with this. That's literally what they did. We're told that they were initially created as some kind of trash disposal solution, intended to break down stuff that wasn't needed into things that were more useful. Of course, that's not entirely certain. There's a little wiggle room due to how long they've been around, but it seems quite certain. There's no reason to disbelieve this. And we're also quite certain they functioned in this role for quite some time without major issue. Perhaps it was the demise of biological life that led to them going full derp. With no one around to keep an eye on them, they mutated over time. Whatever the reason, at this point, they've expanded well outside of their remit and turned into an unstoppable wave of destruction for the Andes. But here's another interesting thing to bear in mind. The streets are littered with trash. With domiciles still standing, other electronic equipment like lights and such also remaining unmolested. It's difficult to ascertain if they have a taste for flesh because we really don't see anything living, but we do know they also have no apparent malice towards things like vegetation. Their sole focus has apparently shifted to targeting the Andes. And Stray. Curious. Very curious. On the surface, Stray and the Andes have nothing, very little, in common. The only thing we can see that makes them comparable is that they both move, which is logic enough. It could simply be that the Zergs have evolved to a form of hunter activated by motion. So they simply fixate on things which are mobile. Though we do see incidental parts of the environment also animated. It's easy enough to discount their disinterest. A sign gently swaying back and forth is not the same as ambulation. It remains effectively stationary. So mayhap they simply discount this style of motion in favour of the Andes because they also change location. Or perhaps they simply look for the motion of extremities specifically, arms and legs. Either solution would allow for them to be drawn to both biological and mechanical entities. However, there is another feature that also sets the Andes apart from their environment. Whilst we see other forms of technology, including computers, which are even still functional in some cases, never mind left intact, the Andes contain advanced cognitive capabilities afforded to them by their internal wiring. They are not simply computational algorithms in the same way as a closed, pre-programmed PC tower. They are capable of learning, lateral thinking, and social awareness and bonding, forming bonds one to the other, which has grown into a full-blown society, multi-layered. But I kinda doubt it's the latter part that caught the Zerg's attention. I'm not inclined to believe that they are some kind of ginger potato species of Matilda Mays. Nay. See, rats and some other rodents are attracted to certain types of cable because of the subsonic hum of the energy, the electricity carried through their filaments. There's something about the specific frequency that calls to them, causing them to gnaw away until it stops. I had some rats, they did that with my power cables, they almost killed themselves. Kind of like the way beavers are compelled to build a dam based on the sound of running water, not its actual presence. There have been experiments showing this by having a device simulate the specific audio frequency of running water, radio, thus causing a family of beavers to build a dam on completely dry land around a speaker. Which could be what the Zurks are up to. They're drawn to the frequency of electrical impulses the Andes use as a transmission medium for their cognition. Thus, it is possible they are drawn to Stray for the same reason. And since living, biological constructs produce intellectual activity in a fundamentally different way than capacitors and diodes, this could be why the Zurks are drawn to both. Because both Stray and the Andes generate their problem-solving modalities in a comparable fashion. In less flowery language, they are both robotic and use circuit boards to think. Which brings us to the point where, finally, I think it's about time to actually play the game and see if anything changes. Spoilers, it didn't. Well, it kind of did, but... So just bear with me whilst I go do that. I'm sure it won't take too long. Just give me, say, 5 minutes and we'll set about drawing some final conclusions. Yeah. Right.
This is awkward.
Oh my. Well, where do I even begin? Probably with the 4,000 some words that came before this point. Sounds like a good idea, what with it already being written and all. Perhaps I'll go back and tweak some of it, but it's not likely. I didn't. So here we are. I played all the way through the game, missing some of the side content and such, but I've experienced most of what the game has to offer. My daughter and I spent several fun hours just being a cat, and we're going to do the same again in a few days. I don't know if we actually did, but we have done since. Hey, maybe we'll do that whilst I'm recording footage for this video. That we actually did. So, strong probability of a dual commentary let's play in the not too distant future, if not already. I have actually uploaded that, I just haven't made it public. Anyway, first things first, because I noticed something I missed the first time around. It seems bringing up Blade Runner was particularly fortuitous, because I've now seen 3 moments in the game when this happens. Though I also have a confession to make. I already knew about the shot at the end of the game, which I won't lie, was precisely why I brought it up in the first place. Though, given the subject matter, I absolutely would still have mentioned it regardless. It just worked out to be especially apt. See, for those who don't know, which is a surprising number of people actually, Deckard is, indeed, a replicant. In the first film. That was the way Ridley Scott made the film. And though he also left it a little ambiguous because he wanted people to ponder it more deeply, his intention is explicit. This is why we have this moment, among others. But this is the specific thing I want to talk about, because we see multiple other instances in the film where other clearly stated replicant characters and animals are shown to have the same eye shine. The latter part is ubiquitous.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
Just answer the questions, please.
But spotting it with Deckard seems to have passed a lot of people by, and those who have noticed it just put it down to a stylistic thing. Now, of course, cat's eyes are known for catching the light like this anyway. I think that's where they got the idea from, with the specific colour varying from yellow to green to red depending on the exact lighting and angle. So it's easy enough to write it off as being just that. However, the fact that it happens so infrequently, with it being such a quick flash at key moments in the narrative, is something that makes it stand out. As in, the fact it doesn't stand out and is very easy to miss makes it more suspicious. It stands out because it doesn't stand out. Like they clearly wanted you to notice because you can so easily miss it. prolixity for the win. I've spent a good amount of time with the game by this point, and even more after writing this, and my kid has played well over 100 hours. And during the entire time, neither of us has seen a single instance of Stray's eyes catching the light and reflecting it during gameplay. This part is actually incorrect. I have seen it since, though it's quite difficult to do. To the best of our ability, we have remained completely incapable of replicating the same. Obviously we haven't, though. Thus, I am confident in saying that the 3 story-related instances of Stray's eyes catching the light are deliberate, specific, and almost certainly intentionally suggestive of a deeper meaning, despite having disproven what I previously said, that it is possible. I still think it stands out. It's all just a little too convenient. You know what I mean? Note, also, that each of these 3 instances coincide with or immediately precede some of the more explicitly sapient moments of the little ginger gobshite. The first being when he first starts interacting with the Andes, and yes, it's B12 that does all the actual talking, but Stray still follows through on the specific instructions given to him, which are just a tad more complex than what one would expect to happen purely by chance. The second time, he reactivates and drives a flumping subway train. And the third time, that one, I think I want to come back to later, because that raises further questions that could completely recontextualize everything. Speaking of following instructions, there's a whole heap of complex problem solving which covers pretty much the rest of the game. It ramps up quite nicely, actually, from a game design perspective. Starting from simple and direct, so much so that apart from the Zerk chase, my 5-year-old can do the entire thing on her own. She'll be 6 when this video comes out. All the way up to the first chat with Momo and setting out to repair the transceiver. She can now do the entire game apart from the 2 chase sequences. Major kudos has to be given to Blue 12 for how well designed everything is. There's a clear progression of complexity that ascends pretty much linearly until the very end of the game. Everything is pretty simple for a human being, even a child. But Stray is press circle to cat. So how, exactly, do we explain his ability to infiltrate a secure facility? As I've alluded to previously, one can absolutely take everything in-game as just a conceit of playing a game. But considering how tightly constructed everything up to acquiring the backpack is, I consistently return to the same thing. In isolation, every little thing can be, almost entirely, accepted as just being part of playing a game. But when you put them all together, it just breaks everything. Yes, a cat is entirely capable of doing almost everything Stray actually does, even some of the most lateral thinking. With enough time, sure, why not? It's just, no, it doesn't work for me. There is too much that breaks the immersion, so to speak. It's B12 talking to Stray that really clinches it for me. Actually, there's one other thing, but I'll bear this out, because I don't know if I mentioned it. Because it's clearly framed as him speaking directly to the cat. And yeah, I get it. If that's the only company you have, you start to anthropomorphize. I have cats, and I used to live alone. I was a full-blown shut-in for a lengthy part of my adult life, and yeah, I also spoke to my cats as though they were fully capable of not only understanding, but also responding. I still do. And B12 has been alone for a very, very long time, truly starved for social interaction in its entirety. But now he's not alone. There's a lot more than just Stray hanging around, and the Andes do actually answer back. Yet they also speak directly to Stray. In fact, it seems that B12 never even tries to communicate with them himself. He only relays what they are saying to Stray, explaining to him because they have a unique, presumably binary-based machine language. The Andes, that is. But he's a cat. You could go with some crazy conspiracy-esque theory that B12 is speaking cat language, but surely it's far less of a leap to just accept Stray isn't a biological cat. And Well, think about this. The backpack was specifically designed to fit on a small quadruped. They overtly say this. Not necessarily a cat, but something of approximate size and shape. And why? Was it originally built with the idea of reprogramming a Zerk? There's that potential link again.
I understood that reference.
So about that facility that Stray breaks into. It's for a company called Neko, with a C. For those who don't know, and I'm sure there are some, Neko, with a K, is the Japanese word for cat. Now, at the risk of dangerously overstressing the point more than I already have, it could be nothing more than a little nod to the players. But there's a lot more going on than it just being part of a slew of other bits and pieces. Neko are the company that actually made, or make even, the Zerks. Or rather, they created the cybernetic bacteria that eventually mutated into the Zerks. They are also, pretty much, the only organization from the old world that still exists, at least within the underground city complex. In fact, it seems the entire city was intended to be one big laboratory, which adds another level of curiousness to the fact that the backpack was designed specifically for a small quadruped. And though the Andes don't seem to have any idea at all what a cat is, B12 recognizes Stray immediately. And I'm glad I didn't mention this earlier because I've actually written it here. There are also a number of Lucky Neko statues scattered throughout the game. You know those cats with the arm that dips down? You often see them in Asian shops. They bring good luck. And though they look somewhat different to Stray, you know they're cats. I find it curious that not even one of the Andes would be able to make the link between them. Which keeps bringing us all back to the same thing. So maybe it's about time we jump in. But one more thing. Again, the cats, the Nekos, the Lucky Nekos could just be a nod to the player. And in isolation, you can explain that away, but it's the number of things all coming together. Anyway, C. The final time we see Stray's eyes do the glow is right at the very end, only seconds before he saunters off back towards the rest of his kitty family, or at least in the direction of where we find them nesting in the game's opening. But just before the image fades to black, we also see a small screen light up blue, which in itself is significant because, well, spoiler warning if you care. To open the roof of the city so Stray can escape, B12 shots out a series of control panels, doing irreparable damage to his body and effectively killing himself in the process. Or so it seems. But that blue screen, I think it's pretty obvious what that means. The only real question is whether Stray was the one who caused that with his laser eyes, or if he was somehow responding to the brief flicker. Either way, it's such a deliberate and brief moment that it was clearly intended to be easy to miss, which, much like the way the eye shine seems to be semi-hidden, makes it stand out all the more once you notice it. So let's think about this again. Zerks are small, quadruped, cybernetic organisms, cyborgs, like Robocop, created by Neko Corporation. Well, not like Robocop because he started out biological, but you know what I mean. They've been the greatest threat to the denizens of the underground city ever since, well, before even the humans all popped their clogs. And the backpack was designed by a human before his death specifically to fit onto such a creature. And yet it works just fine on a random cat that came from the surface, a seemingly extremely intelligent cat at that. So is Stray actually a Zerk? Goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the Fermi paradox. We know they've already evolved at least once, starting out as a bacteria and somehow growing large enough to be, well, roughly cat-sized. The Andes initially think that Stray looks sort of like one of them, only saying he looks different after getting a close look at him. And before he does some of his more intelligent things, his eyes glow. almost like B12 is taking some kind of direct control over his body. Like perhaps he's a cyborg with systems that can be breached, overridden, and directly controlled. Elite Hacksaw-like. One last time, all of these things are minor on their own. But put it all together like that, at the very least, it's extremely likely that, if not a new form of Zurk, Stray is almost certainly, at least partially, cybernetic. So, case closed. End of video, right? I've made my case. Perhaps not proven my hypothesis, but at the very least, presented my evidence in a compelling, conclusive way. And yeah, I'd say that's right. However, there's more to it. There are still a few minor tidbits left to explore, some further context. Intellectual integrity is something that we take very seriously around here, which is why we need to take at least a moment to consider the fate of the Zurks. After all, they're clearly dedicated goths. Sunlight is not their friend. They don't even go out when it's cloudy. They don't even go out to buy milk. And yet, we first join Stray on the surface, strolling around in direct sunlight. If he is a Zurk, that seems a bit odd. Although we do know they've changed significantly since the bacteria was first released. Just because UV light is deadly to them now doesn't mean it always was, although it always will be. Though real world contemporaries, UV light is typically lethal to bacteria in the real world, our world. We often use it in medical settings. We often use it in medical settings to fully sterilize biological samples, medical equipment and the like. Not just like bleach, we use UV rays to make sure we kill absolutely everything. I believe it's also used by the world's space agencies to further ensure things like the Mars rovers don't inadvertently compromise our search for extraterrestrial life by taking microbes from our own biosphere, depositing them on another planet. So they were most likely always vulnerable in this way. But as already stated, we know they've been evolving and changing, for big duration anyway, all the same, all this time. And who's to say Stray and his little family could not have adapted even further? That does feel like a bit too much of a stretch though, so let's look at something else, far more important to the original premise. Flying in the face of the idea that B12 is somehow responsible, directly or otherwise, for Stray's apparent supermog status is the prison section. Okay, I did bring this up. Because we see him doing all the same kinds of things he does throughout the rest of the game. And for most of this time, B12 is sequestered away in a cell of his own, meaning that he's doing all of this under his own recognizance. And yeah, sure, Clementine points to the keys when she wants him to help her escape, but well, he's a cat. Go on, try it yourself. Get your cat to fetch something. They can do it, sure, but they need a lot of training to get the idea. Ask your own cat to go pick up a set of keys in a different room and bring them back to you. It ain't gonna happen. Not without a significant amount of prior conditioning anyway for that specific thing. You'd have to train them to do that one specific thing. You can't train them to do the idea and then go and do it somewhere else. Cats aren't like dogs. This suggests, even if Stray is robotic, and even if B12 is influencing his actions, at the very least, it's no longer an active protest. Protest? Process. I'm leaving that in. Perhaps the modification to his programming is complete, if any took place to begin with. Or, what I feel to be more likely, he was always capable of such relatively lateral, cerebral decision-making. Even right at the beginning of the game, he's already canny enough to stop a fan with a bucket, find and successfully connect a series of batteries, and even free B12 in the first place. Well, I mean, yeah. We also see he has some wireless capabilities. B12, that is. He accesses various other devices along the way, encouraging and directing Stray to his location. No reason he couldn't have done both. But I'd argue several reasons he wouldn't. After all, if B12 could just remotely hack Stray's CPU, cat processing unit, why bother with the guide posting? An extra layer of redundancy maybe, but well, Kiss. Keep it stupid simple. Nay. I say it's far more likely that he was simply capitalizing on the opportunity afforded him and didn't even know Stray was a fully biological feline to begin with. His conversations being nothing more than an inevitable side effect of such a lengthy period of isolation, later borne out by the fact that Stray, actually, implicitly at least, does respond to his communications. And not just his. I didn't notice this until I'd played it a couple more times. When you finish the prison section, you get B12. Clementine talks to Stray before B12 has put the backpack back on. We see what she says. They don't wait until afterwards. We have that short interaction where it's just Stray. So, in short, Stray is a cyborg, if not a full-blown robot. And even if the development team explicitly state otherwise, headcanon is a thing. So for me, that's simply where the story ends. Stray's a robot. That's where it ends. And thus, this video. So all that remains to say is, thank you for watching. Also, I do have a Patreon. If you feel so inclined to help out, it's been a couple of years now. I'm still making absolutely nothing on it. So I'm going to continue either way, but would be appreciated all the same. And y'all can do all the usual engagement on this here platform. Knock yourself out. It would be most appreciated, whether you agree, disagree, or want to call me a complete dipshit. Pork on.